Welcome to another edition of African Economy. I am your host, Wangfon Walter. Good afternoon. Now the highlight. Ghana and Afreximbank in heated dispute over $768 million debt. Equatorial Guinea gains control of oil-rich islands in disputes with Gabon. South Africa's Ramaphosa looks to repair U.S. ties with Musk investments push. And Nigeria's customs Benin Republic partner to boost trade. To the top stories, where U.S. diplomats in Africa will now be evaluated based on the commercial agreements they help secure rather than the amount of aid distributed. The U.S. now prioritizes commercial agreement over aid distribution in African diplomacy. The U.S. ambassador secured $6 billion in commercial deals in Africa during Trump's term's early days. Support for the Lobito Rail Corridor showcases strategic counteractions to China's influence. Ghana, fresh from tough debt restructuring process, is now locked in a dispute with the African Export-Import Bank regarding the restructuring of a $768.4 million debt. The Ghanaian Afreximbank to loan to be treated like other debts it has already restructured, such as bilateral loans from China and $13 billion worth of Eurobonds. In restructuring, lenders often agree to extend payment deadlines, reduce interest rate, or take partial losses to help a struggling country recover. However, Afreximbank says it should not have to take any losses. The Cairo-based bank says it holds preferred creditor status, a designation usually given to institutions like the International Monetary Fund, IMF, or World Bank. The status means that their loans are repaid in full ahead of other creditors and are subject to restructuring. The International Court of Justice has ruled that Equatorial Guinea holds legal sovereignty over a cluster of small islands in the potentially oil-rich waters in the Gulf of Guinea. The ruling marks the end of a decades-long territorial dispute with neighboring Gabon. The International Court of Justice ruled Equatorial Guinea holds sovereignty over certain islands in the Gulf of Guinea. The ruling marks the end of a decades-long territorial dispute with neighboring Gabon and comes at a time when both Central African nations are rethinking their oil strategies. The case concerned with Mbini, Cocotiers, and Konga Islands, previously disputed with Gabon. In its ruling, the court stated that the 1974 agreement Gabon relied on to support its claims to the islands did not qualify as a legally binding treaty. Gabon is required to remove its military presence from the islands following the ruling. To the southern part of Africa, President Cyril Ramaphosa will use his visit to Washington this week to promote investment opportunities for Elon Musk companies as part of a broader push to improve relations with Donald Trump. Relations between South Africa and the U.S. have been strained due to disagreements on land reform and international legal matters. South African President Cyril Ramaphosa is scheduled to meet with Trump on Wednesday, that's tomorrow, in Washington. One potential offer under discussion would grant Tesla, led by Elon Musk, a close Trump ally, favorable tariffs on import into South Africa in exchange for building electric vehicle charging stations across the country. Nigeria's Minister of Aviation and Aerospace Development, Festus Keyamo, has called on African states to move beyond mere policy declarations and take concrete steps towards implementing the single African air transport market. He announced these at the three-day plenary session at the Council of Ministers meeting hosted by the Nigerian Civil Aviation Authority in Abuja. The minister reiterated the significance of the BAG framework in advancing aviation standards and regional integration. Away from that, Algeria secured a $3 billion loan package from the Islamic Development Bank to be disbursed over the next 3 years, aimed at accelerating key development initiatives. Algeria maintains a significant and multifaceted relationship with the Islamic Development Bank, both as a major contributor and beneficiary, having joined the bank in 1974 as a founding member. The funding will focus on major infrastructure projects, including the expansion of Algeria's railway network. The Islamic Development Bank and Algeria are strengthening their partnership through a new framework targeting competitiveness and sustainable growth. Now let's take a look at the top 10 African countries with the largest general government debt, As African governments pursue ambitious development goals ranging from infrastructure renovations to expanded healthcare and education, several have turned to borrowing to meet their financial demands. While borrowing is a normal and often necessary economic instrument, it becomes problematic when the general government debt exceeds the size of the economy. General government debt, expressed as a proportion of GDP, is an important indication of the country's financial health. This figure has been increasing throughout Africa, raising concerns about long-term sustainability. For example, in Ghana and Kenya, rising debt levels have resulted in budget cuts for key services. This not only delays growth, but also disproportionately impacts the most disadvantaged groups. A high debt-to-GDP ratio can lead to debt distress, which occurs when a country is unable to satisfy its debt commitment without external assistance or restructuring. This list is courtesy of the Africa Polls report by the World Bank. Eritrea ranks number 1 in the list. Second on the list is South Sudan, with 142.7%. The third on my list is Cabo Verde. The fourth is Senegal, fifth Mozambique, and the last is Malawi. We will go on a break, and when we are back, African economy continues. Stay tuned. Welcome back. If you're just tuning into your TV, it's Spectrum TV, and I'm your host, Wang Fon Water. And now to the rest of the stories. The Nigerian Customs Service and the Benin Republic Customs Administration have launched SIGMAT connectivity between both countries to digitalize and harmonize cross-border trade. The Comptroller General of Customs, Adewale Adeniyi, announced these while addressing journalists at the same Karaoke Joint Border Post. SIGMAT is an economic community of West African state project that aims to facilitate trade and transport within the region by implementing an interconnected system for managing goods in transit. It creates a digital network for customs authorities in ECOWAS member states to share information on goods moving across borders, streamlining procedures and reducing delays. Transparency International Nigeria has blamed President Bola Tinubu and his predecessors, Muhammadu Buhari and Olusegun Obasanjo, for the years of unaccounted remittances and fraud in the Nigerian National Petroleum Company Limited. TI Nigeria Country Director Uwal Rafsanjani made this known in an interview. This comes as a World Bank Nigeria Development Update report released last week indicted the state-owned company over failure to remit crude revenue amounting to 500 billion naira to the Federation account for October 2024 and December 2024. A detail of the revelation in the World Bank's NDU report showed that out of 1.1 trillion Naira revenue from crude sales and other income in 2024, the NNPCL only remitted 600 billion Naira, leaving a deficit of 500 billion Naira. The unaccounted 500 billion Naira stirred fresh controversies over lack of transparency and corruption in the country's oil behemoth NNPCL. In another development, Nigeria recorded a net migration of a negative 35,202 people in 2024, meaning more individuals left the country than entered. These figures, which includes both citizens and non-citizens, shows the scale of outward movement amid growing socioeconomic pressures. Migration, voluntary or otherwise, continues to serve as a signal of citizens' search for better prospects abroad. For many families, migration is no longer just a choice, it is a survival strategy. Whether it's professionals pursuing stability overseas or students chasing global opportunities, more Nigerians are opting to leave than stay. Eritrea leads the top 10 list of African territories with a net migration rate of a negative 8.7% per 1,000 population, indicating a high outflow of citizens. In contrast, Nigeria's net migration rate sits at just a negative 0.2, which is over 40 times less severe than Eritrea's. While all countries on the list are experiencing negative migration, the scale varies greatly, and that speaks volumes about local economic, political and social realities. Migration is often driven by a mix of hope and hardship. For some, like those in Eritrea, the rate suggests persistent push factors such as political repression or limited opportunity. For Nigeria, though challenges remain, the data suggests that fewer people are living in comparison. In 2024, South Sudan emerged as a standout immigration destination in Africa, with a rate of 19.1 immigrants per 1,000 people, far surpassing all other countries on the continent. Equatorial Guinea followed at a distant second with 12.1% net migrants per 1,000, but no other African country crosses even the 5 per 1,000 mark. This sharp drop off highlights the exceptional nature of South Sudan's and Equatorial Guinea's immigration activity relative to the rest of the continent. Kenya has dismissed U.S. concerns over its growing ties with China, affirming its strong U.S. partnership while pursuing a foreign policy based on mutual benefit and sovereignty. These accusations surfaced during a U.S. Senate hearing led by Senator Jim Risch, chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, who criticized Kenya's foreign policy under President William Ruto, particularly its growing engagements with China. Kenyan officials highlighted their aim for balanced global influence and continued relations with the U.S. Nigeria and the government of United Arab Emirates have agreed to recognize the United States dollar and other freely convertible currencies as legal tender for affairs between Nigeria and the UAE. This development was revealed in the updated bilateral air services agreement between both nations. These agreements paved the way for Emirates Airlines' official return to Nigeria, ending a prolonged diplomatic and commercial stalemate that saw the airline suspend operations in Nigeria in 2022. The agreement explicitly grants designated airlines from both countries the right to sell tickets and ancillary services in other local currencies or other internationally accepted currency. UAE's designated airlines include Emirates, Etihad Airways, Air Arabia, Fly Dubai, Air Arabia Abu Dhabi, and Wizz Air Abu Dhabi. Nigeria's designated airlines are Air Peace and United Nigeria Airlines. As per the recent monthly oil reports by the Organization of the Petroleum Exporting Countries, OPEC, in April, the OPEC reference basket ORB value fell by $5.02 or 6.8% month on month to average 68.98 dollar per barrel. The OPEC reference basket ORB value dropped by 6.8% in April, averaging 68.98% barrel. Year to date, the ORB value is $74.82 per barrel, reflecting a 10.6% decrease from the previous year. Specific crude oil components saw varying degrees of price decline influenced by market dynamics. Additionally, the world's oil demand in 2025 is projected to climb by 1.3 million barrels per day, year-on-year, unchanged from last month's projection. Despite recent tariff-related changes, the global economy is on track for growth, and as for Africa's largest oil producer, Nigeria, the trend is prevalent. Here are the African countries with the largest oil production last month in 1,000 barrels per day, according to OPEC's report. First on the list is Nigeria, with 1,471,000 barrels, a negative of 28. We have Libya's second as 1,263,000 barrels, a negative of 14. Algeria third with 912,000 barrels per day, a negative of 1. Congo as 260,000 barrels per day, a negative 0. And last on my list is Gabon, 222,000 barrels per day, a negative of 1. Safe Congo, which plateaued at 0, much like last month when it stood as the only country in the list to record an increase. Every other country in the list produced less oil. The South African rand was around 18.1 per US dollar, easing slightly from the 5-month high of 18 reached on May 15th, as traders adopted a cautious stance ahead of this week's budget announcement. Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana is set to deliver his third budget speech on May 21, where he is expected to outline measures to address a 75 billion rand revenue shortfall following the scrapping of a proposed value-added tax increase amid disagreements with coalition partners. On the same day, President Cyril Ramaphosa is scheduled to meet with U.S. President Donald Trump in Washington as part of ongoing effort to repair diplomatic ties between the two nations. Meanwhile, the South African Reserve Bank, SARB, is expected to leave interest rate unchanged at its upcoming MPC meeting on May 29, while emerging debate over the country's inflation target injects fresh uncertainty into the policy path. Now let's look at the performance of the African currency against the US dollars. And first on my list, we have the US dollars against Nigeria, which is at 1,598.485, dropped to 3.67, a negative of 0.2%. Second on my list is US dollars against the Zaran, and the price is 17.98, dropped to 0.0987, a negative of 0.55%. We have the US dollars against the Zimbabwe Kwanj, 27.0900, and rose to 0.0950, negative of 0.5%, among others. Okay, let's take a look at the African And that's a wrap on African Economy. Thank you so much for watching today's edition. Do well to follow us on all of our social media channels at SpectrumTVLive.ng. I am Wangfun Walter. Good afternoon.